My name is Artur. I'm part of Android Academy, and today we are going to proceed with a few very cool presentations. Let me talk you about Android Academy a bit. And Android Academy is an organization that is like non-commercial. We have about 5,000 members already. We have thousands and thousands of views for our talks recently, and I hope that today's talk will give another 5,000 or so. And Android Academy works in different countries, in different places, and organizers of Android Academy are brought from different places of the world as well. That's why today we will speak in English. So people from the USA, from Russia, from Europe, Asia, India, and any other country that are interested in Android technologies will be able to follow us. And today, we will have a deep dive in Jetpack. Dmitry Movchan from Revolut will talk about Jetpack pagination. Manuel Vivo from Google will tell you everything about Jetpack Dagger Hilt and how can you improve your DI processes using it. And Alexey Bykov from Revolut will discuss the advantages and disadvantages that you will see with StartUp API and ActivityResult API. And that's actually not it, because this event is part of a series of events. And in 2 weeks, on August 18th, we'll talk about Art of Jetpack Navigation Component, we'll talk about Camera X, and maybe there will be some secret talk. So stay tuned to see what else will be on that date. And today, we can start. And to be able to better and easier start this topic with Manuel Vivo. Hi, Manuel Vivo. Yep, you can unmute.
Hi there. How are you? Nice to be here.
Yeah, great. So Manuel Vivo is an Android developer relations engineer at Google, and he has his previous experience in Capital One, and he currently focuses on app architecture, Kotlin Coroutines, Dependency Injection, and Jetpack Compose. Manuel, do you have something to add about yourself?
No, you defined me pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, great. And let's start with a small icebreaker. So Manuel, would you rather have the power to make others laugh, or you would like to make yourself laugh? And why? The most important question.
Yeah, I would prefer to make other people laugh. I don't consider myself a funny guy, so I guess I wouldn't want to laugh at my own jokes. that would be pretty lame. So I would prefer people to have some fun with me, and if I make a really bad joke, they should laugh, right? Because I have the power.
I have the power, definitely. So yeah, you can share your screen, so I'll be able to show it in the stream. And I think that, yeah, that's definitely a pretty important skill to be able to make people laugh when you are giving some presentation, because it makes it easier to understand, it makes it easier to remember. And yeah, let's hope that this presentation will be remembered for everyone for years and years and years. And let's start. Manuel, your turn. Thank you. Oops.
Cool. Yeah, there we go. Sure. Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here talking about Hilt today. So for those who don't know, Hilt is a new dependency injection library for Android, and we're going to be talking more about it today. So a little bit of the agenda, I'll try to stick to 30 minutes. And so we're going to do a little bit of recap, and just to know why dependency injection is important and why you might need Hilt in your app. Then obviously we are going to talk about the library itself, about Hilt. And then we're going to see how components work as a dependency injection container that we will see in a second. And then lastly, to see what's coming up in the library. So obviously we can have a dependency injection talk without going through the basics, so that we all are on the same page. And basically, dependency injection is a design pattern where a class is going to receive dependencies instead of the class creating them itself, because that's going to be bad for refactoring, testing, etc. And dependency injection has a long time. It's been there for a lot of years. It's one of the most important design patterns in programming in general. And so there are a couple of things here that you might have heard of in the past, which is like the separation of concerns, well, like it's a very old design principle as well, where each class should have address a separate concern. Like they should be focused on a specific task to complete. And then also talking about the solid principles, we have the S here, which is the single responsibility principle, where a class should only have one reason to change. And of course, then with object-oriented programming, it means like now inversion of control came, saying that the control of a class should be passed from outside instead of the class managing everything on their own. And then dependency injection is just a way to do this inversion of control. But let's stop being theoretical about this and let's see an example. So for example, here we have this music player, and without dependency injection, the music player will be creating their own stuff. Like for example, if it needs a database, it will create like their own database itself, and then the codecs that it might use. And so here the dependencies are created inside the class. And so if in case you want to create a music player for your app or in your main method, you just have to create a music player instance and use it. While this might seem very simple and easy to use, it has a lot of problems. So for example, you cannot use or reuse this music player with, let's say, another database of music or with any other codecs. You will have to change music player, and it's not really reusable. And also, like, this class cannot be easily tested. This is because everything is hard-coded, and in case you want to pass in, for example, an in-memory database, you won't be able to do that. And also, it will be more difficult to refactor because at first glance, you don't know what's going on inside the class. Imagine that the class has, I don't know, like 1,000 lines of code there, and there's no way you can refactor it into smaller pieces. So with the dependency injection, this changes a little bit. So with dependency injection, those dependencies are going to be passed into the class instead of the class creating them itself. So there are different ways to do dependency injection, but one way is to do it in the constructor. So you are passing the dependencies of a class into the constructor itself. But now, whenever you want to create this music player, now you have to build those dependencies beforehand, before creating the music player. So in this case, for example, from the main method, you have to create the database, the codecs, and then with that dependencies, then you can create the music player. And so we said that dependency injection is a good design pattern that we recommend to use in Android. But now this kind of comes up with other trade-offs that you have to consider. And as you can see here, there are like a lot of logic to create one single object. There is a lot of logic to create the music player. You need to construct that object with all of the dependencies. And this brings up the topic of having the construction logic versus the business logic. So the construction logic, it could be simple, like you could say like 2 dependencies, you create 2 objects, and that's it. Or it can be more complicated. Imagine like a class with 10 dependencies, and then those dependencies having more transitive dependencies. So this is quite complicated. And that has to be separated out from the business logic. The business logic is what your app does, basically, without having to do that. So we have to separate this out. And this is very, very important. Separate the constructing logic from the business logic. And so now, if we take into account the single responsibility principle and everything that we said before, at least we should have some object, like something that is able to contain this construction logic. And that's going to be the dependency injection container. Or in Hilt, as we will see later, this is what the Hilt component is going to do. A Hilt component or a dependency injection container is going to have all the logic in order to provide or create dependencies and instances of different types. So as another kind of recap, Danny Santiago and I gave this talk, the dependency injection on Android, last year, where we went into more details why you might need dependency injection in application. And basically, we also said a couple of things more. So dependency injection has great benefits. We recommend you to use it. And why a library is important is because if you use a tool to manage dependency injection, it means that that tool is gonna remove the boilerplate that we have seen before. So that boilerplate of having to build your music player, for example, imagine you have to build that music player from 4 or 5 different places in your application. You might have to repeat that logic or probably encapsulate in a DI container. So a tool, a dependency injection tool, basically is gonna remove you that cost. It's gonna generate that code for you, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. So dependency injection in Android is a bit hard because the framework classes are instantiated by the SDK. So for example, the activity, you don't own how to create an activity. You cannot pass any dependencies to the activity. The framework is gonna create it for you. And we improved this a little bit over the past years. For example, some factories were added in the API 28, but obviously that's not realistic. Not a lot of apps can afford having the min SDK as 28, of course. So what about the Dagger? If you watched the talk that we gave at Android Developer Summit last year, we recommended Dagger as the recommended solution for dependency injection on Android. But Dagger is complicated because it's hard to configure, and it has a steep learning curve. And this is because there are multiple paths to do exactly the same thing. And that's what makes Dagger difficult. Like, it's very powerful, but at the same time, it's hard to come to an agreement between Android developers. And so you, the community, asked us for a better dependency injection solution. Actually, like 49% of the people that completed the survey last year wanted something like this. And what they wanted, and also what we wanted, was a dependency injection library that was opinionated so that we make decisions for you, and that kind of reduces the load and the workload that you have to do. A solution as well that is easy to set up, and a solution that lets you focus on what's important. And in this case, the dependencies, the bindings. The bindings we will see later, that is the information that the tool knows how to create something. And that's how Hilt got created. So Hilt has come, like we announced the library in June this year, and it's the recommended solution to do dependency injection in Android. And basically, it's going to standardize how to do things in Android, how to do dependency injection. And this library is actually built on top of Dagger. You might be familiar with Dagger because it's been the recommendation so far, but now this has taken over Dagger. And also, the good thing about Hilt is that it has tooling support. So, for example, in Android Studio, you can quickly navigate between dependencies and where your dependencies are coming from with just one click in the gather icons that we have there. And obviously, this also comes with Android X extensions that we are going to see later. Cool. So no more introduction to why dependency injection. I hope I could convince you that you should use dependency injection. We're going to see how you can use Hilt in your application. So the setup here, it's pretty easy. So if the way to tell Hilt how to generate a piece of code with you, so we said that Hilt is going to generate code, and it's going to generate all that construction logic code that you would need to write otherwise. And the way to tell Hilt how to build an instance of something is with this @inject annotation. For example, in the music player, we tell @inject in the constructor, and this is going to tell Hilt how to create instances of music player. And that's it. So it needs to annotate the constructor, as I said. But then if you want Hilt in your application, you also need to annotate your application with @Hilt Android app. And so this is gonna tell Hilt that it needs to start generating code and generate all your dependencies graph for you. And now we said before that you don't control how to create activities, and neither Hilt knows how to do it. And so if you want to use dependency injection in Android framework classes, you need this @Android entry point. So basically, this is telling Hilt that this activity needs to use dependency injection. And so, for example, if here we wanted to grab an instance of a music player, so instead of creating all the classes ourselves, with the @inject annotations as well, it will be ready to use. So in this case, with Hilt, like a couple of annotations, and now you could call player.play directly from the onCreate method. And I didn't say it before, but Hilt works with annotations. So basically, it's going to run an annotation processor that is going to generate that code for you. And so far, we've seen the Hilt Android app to set up Hilt in your application, and then Android entry point to tell Hilt that this Android framework class is using Hilt and requires injection. But now we started with a very simple music player, and that wasn't realistic, right? Because now, let's say, like music player, as we saw in the introduction, it needs a database. And so because it needs a database, now Hilt, in order to create the music player, needs to also know how to create a music database. So how we can do that? So for example, let's say that for the music database, we could use Room, but it could be like, for example, an interface or something. So if we are creating the database with Room, we don't control how the constructor of the database, because Room is going to do that for us. So how can we tell Hilt how to create instances of this? And a solution is using modules. So a module basically is a class that is going to contain information for Hilt. And a module is annotated with @module, and also with this @installing annotation that is going to tell Hilt where to install these definitions or this information, as we will see in a second. So for example, with a method annotated with @provides, we can tell Hilt, hey, if you need to provide an instance of a database, you will need to execute this piece of code. And so here we can provide, in modules, we can provide any information that we want. And you can see this as some sort of like recipe. So Hilt is going to come in the application graph and it's going to say, hey, how can I create something? And then if it's annotated with @inject, then it will use it, as we saw before with music player. But if not here, we are going to give the information to Hilt about how to create something. So in this case, we are creating Room, a database builder, and that's it. And this is because we cannot control the constructor of Room and how to build this database. So use @install as well to say where that information is going to be provided. So in this case, with application component, let me go back in a second. With application component, we want this information to be available at the root level, at the application level. And we will see later that we have more components, which in Hilt is the DI container that we saw before. And this is the next topic. As I was saying, like components in Hilt are basically these dependency injection containers that is going to contain the glue, right? It's going to be the glue of all our dependencies, and it's going to contain the construction logic of the app. It's gonna know with those annotations that in order to provide a music player, first it needs to construct these other dependencies that it requires. And basically, under the hood is using factories. So Hilt, for every type that you might have, it can do later some optimizations, but basically, it's going to have factories to create the music player. It's going to have a factory to create the database, and that's all that like another common design pattern that Hilt uses under the hood. And also, apart from the factories, is also Hilt is also going to know when to hold an instance of something. For example, if you want to reuse an instance, that we will see later how to do it, it will do that as well for you. And so we have multiple components or DI containers in Hilt, and this is where Hilt is opinionated in Android. So Hilt automatically is going to provide these components for you. So it means like a container will be added to each Android framework class, and the container is going to follow the life cycle. So for example, the application component will be attached to the application class, and that container, as we'll see, will have information about how to build things, and it will get created when the application component or the application gets created, and destroyed when that happens. And the same for the activity. It's going to follow a similar approach. So an activity is going to have a dependency injection container attached to it, and then every activity will have its own container. And so with that, like dependencies, like say, for example, that we said, hey, I want to install my database into the application component. So that information, that recipe, is going to flow down into the hierarchy. And that means that if, for example, the activity container needs the database, it can access it because it was available in the application container. So those dependencies are going to be they are going to flow down, and that information is going to be available in those low-level containers as well. But apart from this, we also have other kind of components. So for example, we have the service component in case that you want to use Hilt out of the box in a service, as well as a view component. So you can have a view component that extends directly and get information from the activity, because it might be in the activity, used in an activity, or the fragment component, view with fragment component, in case you want to get information from the fragment itself. So as we were saying here, so we have the application component that are going to be managed by the Android framework classes. And as I said as well before, every new activity will get its own instance of the component. So they are not reused. They will have different instances. And that means, with the information that we had before, is that now, if my activity component requires a music database, because we want to inject it there, we want to pass it as a dependency, it means here that because we haven't said anything to Hilt, Hilt is going to provide different instances when providing the music database. So if you look at the music database reference, they have different instances. And this is because that information, like by default, Hilt is always going to provide a different instance unless you specify it otherwise. So ideally here, we would want to reuse the same database because, shared connections for synchronization purposes and a common location for observers. So how can we share this music database between these activities? And the way to tell that to Hilt, because Hilt is going to generate code to do this, is by using annotations as well. And so whenever here we have our information about how to provide a database, we can use annotations to tell Hilt, hey, I just want you to provide a single instance every time that you are providing this as a dependency. And so the application component, we can as singleton. And basically here, if we annotate this information, this recipe or this binding with a singleton, whenever it's used as a dependency again, you will see that it will reuse the same instance. And this is what in Hilt and Android is called scoping. Scoping an object to a container or scoping an object to a class means that every time that that type is requested, it is going to return the same instance. Now, I will tell you later why this is important. I created a blog post writing more about this. And so I said, so application component means that you have to use @singleton. And then if you want to scope any other instance to the container or the component, you have different annotations to do that. So for example, activity scoped means that a type is going to be scoped by that component. And so now, so we said we are going to have, let's go back 1 second. We have a container, a component for every Android framework class. But what happens to those classes where Android Hilt is not able to provide that? So for example, here we can use entry points. So let's say we have a content provider, and a content provider is not directly supported by Hilt. And this is because the content provider lifecycle is a bit weird. And so how can we make the content provider graph dependencies from Hilt? So we can do that using entry points. So basically, if we wanted the content provider to use the music database, it should use an entry point. Let's see how to do that. So for example, we have here the playlist content provider, and the way to grab dependencies from Hilt, from classes that are not supported directly by Hilt, is using an interface. So you have the interface, and then you annotate it with a Android entry point, and then you install it again in the application component. Here, it means basically we want to grab something from the application.di container. And the classes that you want to grab is here specified in the interface as a method. So for example, if we want to grab the music database, we just have to specify that. And then whenever we need it, for example, in the query method of a content provider, we can use a static method called entry point accessors. And here you pass in the instance of the entry point. And with that, you can grab the same dependency that Hilt is going to provide to other classes from the application component. Cool. So I said, now we see how to use Hilt with Android framework classes, how to use it in other classes that are not Hilt friendly in that sense. But then Hilt also integrates with other Jetpack libraries. So when we launch Hilt, we launch it with extensions for view model and the work manager. And this is kind of happening the same problem, right? Whenever you want to build a view model, you don't own that because you need a view model factory. And then the framework is going to give you the instance of that view model. But with Hilt, you don't have to worry about that. So in case you want to inject a view model in your activity, for example, you can use the @viewModelInject annotation in the constructor. And Hilt is going to generate all that view model factory code that you would have to write otherwise. And also Hilt works with the state handle. So here you can mark any dependencies, this specific dependency with assisted, and then you can pass it any other dependencies that your view model might require. So for example, you can pass in the music database that is going to grab from the application.di container. And so if you want to use this view model in your activity, it has your activity also, or fragment needs to know about Hilt. So it needs to be annotated with @Android entry point. And basically, you can call the by view models, which is the KDX extension, or using it as you would normally do. So we've seen that we have a couple of annotations and then @entry point, just to grab things from the container in classes that are not supported by Hilt, and then viewModelInject. Okay, so I have a few minutes, 5 minutes left, so I'm going to quickly go through testing. And testing, something similar happens with testing when you are writing your manual tests. So for example, in case we wanted to build the music player, now in your test, you have to create all the classes again. And you have the same problems that you had before doing manual dependency injection, creating everything manually. And that's going to be hard. Not in this particular use case with music player, because it has only one dependency, but imagine if this gets more complicated and you need to pass more dependencies. And so with Hilt, this kind of gets simplified as well, because you can use Hilt to grab the dependencies from you to build the music player. And for that, to have Hilt in your test, you annotate it with Hilt Android test. You use a rule to get some injections, and then you inject what you want to inject. In this case, the music player, because it's what we want to test. And then you create inject just to in the before and the JUnit before, you call inject to populate the music player. And then you can use you can test your code, your player, as you would normally do. And here you can see that Hilt has been in charge of automatically like building all that graph for you without you having to worry about. But this code has a problem, right? Because this code, so in the code that we did manually before, we were using an in-memory database. But Hilt, in this case, is providing the real instance of the database because we haven't told him otherwise what to do. And the way to do this is by using annotations as well. So with the uninstall module, you can pass in a module that you want to unload. So in this case, the data module contained the information of how to build the database. And so here we are telling Hilt, hey, don't worry about this information because I don't want it anymore. But instead, what you want to do is creating the in-memory database, right? So you can create a module inside the class, providing or telling Hilt how to what to inject when a database is needed. So in this case, you can say, hey, now I want to use my in-memory database builder whenever I need a database in this particular test. And so this only works for this particular test because it has been defined inside the test. But if you put this out of this class and put it at a general level, then it would go and it would apply to all your tests. And then all your tests will use the in-memory database instead. Cool. I'm going to skip this. So we have more annotations about Hilt for testing specifically. So we've seen the Hilt Android test and uninstall modules, but then we have bind value and some other things. All of this is done in, it's also written in the testing documentation available. Let's skip this. So about migration, so you might have your application in either Dagger or Dagger Android, because Dagger was the recommendation last year. But we are providing like easy, for example, APIs to migrate between Dagger and Hilt. And also you can have Dagger and Hilt working on the same project side by side. And this is because Hilt works and is made on top of Dagger. For a more comprehensive migration guide, you have here the link to the documentation. So what's next? So something the team is working on currently is trying to have Hilt outside Android Gradle modules. You've seen that Hilt is pretty integrated with the Android framework classes, and it's shipped with an AAR. It means that you cannot use it in a Kotlin-only module, for example, Gradle module. So now we are exploring different ways to have this working. And also with assisted injection, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is the way to tell at runtime different dependencies that might not available at compilation time. And also more Android text integrations that we are exploring, for example, the navigation library. And cool, so give us feedback, try Hilt. You have here like some links to the documentation. So for more like Android-friendly documentation, try Hilt, developers.android.com/Hilt. And then like if you want to file a feature request or a bug, use the GitHub repo, which is the Dagger repo. And to learn more about this, you have the code labs, have how to integrate Hilt in your Android app, as well as how to migrate from Dagger to Hilt. And throughout this time, since June, we've been creating blog posts about Hilt. So you have, how to add custom components, how we migrated the Google I/O app to Hilt, and how to scope in Android and Hilt. This is what I mentioned before. And obviously as well some code samples that you might want to check out to see how Hilt works in your Android app. And I think that's been 30 minutes straight on spot. Thank you so much for listening, and hope to answer any questions you might have now.
Yep, perfect time. Thank you. Thank you, Manuel. And here is a reminder for each of you guys who are looking for us now, who are listening us, that you should feel free to write a question here in chat, and we will try to answer everything. And let's start with the first one. Okay. Alexander asks, how do you see Hilt being integrated with Compose?
Yeah, this is something I'm currently exploring with the team. We don't know how to do that yet because Compose is obviously based on functions, and then what Hilt does is kind of generating code which are injected into classes. So we are trying to see how we can make this possible, but this is definitely something that is at the back of our minds.
Okay, great. Let's see what happens next. And Lior Ayor yeah, sorry if I pronounce it wrong, has the next question. Coin versus Hilt, pros and cons. Do you have this experience? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so this is kind of the never-ending question. I mean, I have to say that dependency injection is quite a controversial topic. And this is because it touches on the fundamentals of your app. So your whole app is based on this design pattern. And so deciding what library to use, it's actually pretty important. And obviously, so obviously, any choice that you want to do, it's totally fine. And the Hilt is what Google recommends, but obviously you can use anything that you want. And I guess like the pros of Hilt is that everything is generated at compile time. And that makes Hilt to be more performant at runtime. And obviously the benefits of Coin is that because it uses kind of a map with all the bindings and information available, it makes it easier, for example, to find anything at any point in your, or at any place in your application. So let's say you have a dynamic feature module, and because you look up into that giant map with all your dependencies, then it's easier to use. So for example, dynamic feature modules, you get that easy to use framework, but then you might lose other benefits that Hilt might have, such as compile time safety, for example, and scalability.
Yep, thank you. That was a pretty detailed answer. And the next question is from Alexander, who asks, when does actual injection happen in case of late init properties in an activity if you are using Android entry point annotation?
Yeah, so this is actually in the documentation. You can find that for every Android class when the injection is happening. And in this case, in an activity, it happens before onCreate. So after Hilt actually is going to generate a superclass with all the dependencies and that information. And so whenever you call onCreate in your own activity, you will be safe to call the dependencies.
Okay, great, thank you. And Leo is interested how to destroy and re-init the singleton object. For example, if you need to have a user session based on the database singleton object, and we want to re-init or destroy the object during user logout or login. Yep.
Yeah, so Hilt doesn't give you this functionality at the moment, unfortunately. So it's not like Dagger that you have more granularity on when to create or destroy that application component. And so there is not an easy answer for this in Hilt, because you cannot do that. So either trying to find other ways, creating other components. Obviously, making that object nullable is not a nice solution. So either probably I would create a custom component to do this.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I like a question from me to continue. Do you think that, for example, clearing and deleting the whole component and recreating this component would be a viable solution as well? Something like, can we give a comment to Hilt that, oh, okay, please create this again?
Yeah, so that's not possible with the components that Hilt provides out of the box. Okay. And that's because Hilt is going to manage the life cycle for you. But what you can do, as I was saying, you can create your own component. Actually, the blog post I mentioned before, like creating your custom component, explains exactly that. The use case there is creating a user component. And because that's your own component, it's your custom component, you can manage its life cycles. For example, you can get the factory to create it and destroy it whenever you want. And that's basically the use case in that blog post.
Yep, got it. Great, thank you. And the next question is from Yoni. How stable is Hilt and is it ready for production?
Yeah, so the Hilt, the engineers working on Hilt talked in a podcast in Android Developers Backstage about this. And basically what they say, like, we've been using Hilt at Google for a long time in apps, for example, like internal Google apps and, like, for example, Gmail, all of that. have been using Hilt for a long time. That means that it is ready for production. But then there are a few things that we added, and that's why it's marked as alpha. So a couple of things we added is that new testing annotations, and also the Android Gradle plugin. So the @Android entry point does a little bit of magic under the hood with some bytecode transformation, and that's what kind of not in experimental, but it's what it's going to be more new at the moment, and that's why it's alpha at the moment. But kind of what is the stable libraries and the core of the functionality, it's pretty stable and ready to be used in production.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, and actually, even one of our listeners is telling that he's using it in a big project and it works for them. So that's definitely a good sign. Another question from Yoni is that Jetpack navigation with Hilt, when using nested graph and some components, how should it work basically? Where ever fragments has subcomponent which contributes to childer fragments, and basically how to do it in these nested hierarchies.
Right. So the other blog post I wrote about scoping with Hilt and Android talks exactly about this. So you can also scope with view models. You don't have to use Hilt for everything. And so, for example, if you have nested graphs using a navigation, you can have view models scope to those graphs. And therefore, like, you might be better off scoping with view models instead of Hilt. But again, we are exploring as well this. When I said like what's next, we are seeing like different ways to integrate with the navigation library, and that's something like we have to address.
Thank you. One more question is from Evgeny: how to inject for main activity to an object which created in main activity? Basically, what to do if we have cyclic dependencies. Here is an example. We have a class inner main activity, and main activity wants to have the same class as well.
So, right. So the components available in Hilt, something I didn't mention is that they have some bindings already created for you. So, for example, if you are in the activity component, you have access to the activity and you have access to the activity context. And so in any class that you might have that is used in the activity, you can pass in the activity as a dependency, and Hilt is going to automatically do that for you.
Great. And the last question, I hope you still have some strength to answer it, is from David. So is there a module scope? So a library module can manage its own DI, but still function properly when integrated with an app?
No, we don't have that right now. And I guess that's a pretty good piece of feedback. So if you can file a feature request, that would be great. But here, what we recommend for now is creating, as I was saying, your custom component, and then making your consumer use that component instead. Or like otherwise, like, we don't have like that such, like you could, for example, from your library, have a module that gets installed in the activity component, but that's not probably the scope that you are looking for. So create a custom component for now.
Great. So yeah, Manuel, thank you. As you see, your talk was like a rocket, and it was pretty interesting to hear how the Hilt works. It was very nice to hear your answers to the questions. And
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's been challenging trying to explain Hilt in 30 minutes, but I hope that I did a good job. And if not, like always, the documentation is there to help me out. And thank you so much for having me. It's been great. Had such a great time. Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Yep. And let's switch to the next talk. So, and now Dmitry will accompany me, and we're continuing. So Dmitry Movchan from Revolut, he will talk about Jetpack Generation 3. And Dmitry is a senior Android engineer at Revolut. He works as an organizer in Android Academy in Moscow. He works as a different conferences organizer as well, as I know. And yeah, Dmitry, let's start from a small icebreaker with you. So what do you think? Would you rather be the world's fastest runner, or would you rather own the world's fastest car?
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. Hi, everyone. First of all, I guess having any fastest car is much preferable for me just because I love the cars. So probably it can be also not the fastest, but I would prefer it.
So you would prefer to stay in traffic jam in Moscow in the fastest car instead of running,
Yeah,
right?
like I do every day. It's okay.
Got it. Cool. Yes, sorry for that. Can you introduce yourself if you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, I have a slide for that, so I guess we can
Oh,
switch to
so
presentation.
let's do it this way then. I agree. So I'll leave you, not me again, you.
Turn we okay. We can continue like that if you didn't close your browser. Um, Probably if I left with my slides, I can start, I guess. So, hi everyone. Once again, my name is Dmitry. Today I will talk about the paging library version 3 and uh, a couple of words about me. Let me check everything fine. Yeah. So, uh, as Arthur said, I'm an Android developer at Revolut. I'm developing Android since 16th of this century. Right now, I am also organizer of Android Academy Moscow, and I really like to speak at conference and organize them. So today we're going to talk about pagination, and basically you can ask me what is the paging itself. Paging, it's like almost about every list that we have in our application if they are huge. For example, we have the news feed on our social media and so on. We have music tracks. We have transaction lists in our bank application and so on. There are a really huge list of data, and we don't want to load the full list at once when we start our application. Why we don't want to load the full list? There are a couple of things why it shouldn't happen. First of all, it will be a really huge lag between loading and showing data if you're loading a huge size of this data. Uh, Also, we can face some problems with performance when we loading huge amount of data, trying to somehow show it or something like this. And it also is statistics that more than half of people will leave your application, your site, whenever if the loading takes more than 3 seconds. So uh, it's like abstract level. Diving into more technically, let's see simple realization when we have some list containing a lot of items. So we creating the endpoint on your backend, uh, the items, and we want to take 5 items starting from 100. So we just coding your backend with limit equals 5 and offset equals 100, and you will get these 5 items into return. Once you want to see another 5 items, you should like just increase your offset by 5 items that you previously have seen. So you'll get your new items here. Okay, what's Android offer us right now? Uh, if we talk about paging, it will be paging library. So it's like a preset of abstract classes and so on that will help us to download the data by small chunks, and it will be really reduce your usage of network and so on. So if you will proceed to the page on the bottom of this slide, you'll see the new features about the paging version 3. So the main thing that is already implemented in this is that this library is fully written on Kotlin with support of coroutines. Uh, I will show it in an example later, but right now it looks pretty good. And also, if you're like me, staying in love with Eric Java, you can just simply add dependency on the library that will help you to produce observable or followable streams. Also, we have some built-in support for error handling and loading states. Today we will see it. So, if you want to include this library into your project, you should just call the implementation Android paging runtime. And right now, the recent version that we have right now, it's an alpha version 3. So moving on, before we dive in, how we usually creating any list in our application. So I prepared a small scheme for that. We got the activity fragment view whenever that containing inside it recycler view. And to this recycler view, we're setting the adapter that is just extended from recycle view.adapter class. And then we're just going to ask some data from your model presenters from your activity itself. It's normal. Don't worry. It's the usual theme, like how we are creating the list in our application. So what's different when we will try to use paging library? This is how it will work. We still have some activity fragment view that containing recycler view, and we should set to it adapter that is called paging data adapter. After that, we are going to our view model presenter. Still, you can do it inside your activity, for example. And we are communicating with class that's called pager. This pager itself is working with paging config and paging source. After that, pager returning some flow or observable paging data that will be submitted to paging data adapter. So let's see each element closer, and we will start with paging data adapter. So this is the usual adapter that is extending recycler view adapter, and the only thing that is really different that we should pass to constructor diff callback. We will see later why we need it. So also we can pass the main dispatcher and worker dispatcher. This is like describing the threads on which main operation will be executed. So also we see that in generics we have view holder as usual and some class that extending any. It will be our list item model for which we should write the default callback. Moving on, if you don't want to use paging data adapter in your application, you have your own adapter, for example, you can use the async paging data ticker. This is class is used in paging data adapter itself. We can see the example inside the paging data adapter is created differ. And then when we try and, for example, submit some data to this adapter, we just calling differ.submit data. And we are passing paging data. You can ask me what is paging data. Okay, moving on. The next element of the paging library is paging source to help us to produce this paging data. Okay, the paging source is usual abstract class where we have two generics. First of them is just key. It will be a type of pagination key. For example, if your backend supports pagination by tokens, it will be strings, for example. And if your paging is just by some keys, it will be, I guess, usual integer. And value, it will be item of the model that you use in the list. Also, the only one abstract function that is inside the paging source load. It has the parameter load parents and returning load result. Let's talk about these things more closely. For this purpose, there is an example of the paging source. Let's call it my paging source and pass to it constructor some backend service. So here we describing that the key of the pagination will be string, and we can see that we're trying to get some response from the backend by this key that we are passing from load parent. Yeah, this is how it works. After that, we should return new keys for the next page of your paging on backend and previous keys. For example, if we listed our list too far and we want to return and the previous item was removed or something like that, we just passing the previous key that will allow us to show the previous batch of data. So we should return the load result. Load result is a usual field class with the two classes inside. First of all, it's page. Page, continue to the next slide. So page, this is the class that is consists of data itself and like previous key and next key. The hero class, that's the usual hero. Whatever can happen when we're trying to get data, we will pass to load result dot error. Moving on, the last thing, but really interesting one, it's paging config. This is config is describing how many data we should load every time, how the items should be shown when they're loaded, and so on. And of course, at which distance we should prefetch new data. Let's get closer to the thing. So paging config have a number of arguments, and one of them, not one of them, a couple of them having some uh, usual, some default parameters. For example, initial load size is the usual page size multiplied by 3, and max size is like usual integer max value. Let's talk about each of these parameters. So for this purpose, let's just create some my paging source again and put inside some logs that will show us with which parameters it's called and which key we execute and which load size we passing by to this function. So the first example, we have page size and initial load size that is equal to page size multiplied by 3. How it will look? We're starting our application with page size, for example, let it be 7. Once our application loaded, it will be initial loading of 3 times our page size. So as we can see here, we will load 21 items and start the application. And after we will try to move further in our list, we will load only new 7 items here. Let's try to change the page size to 8, for example. What will happen here? So the load size will be at the beginning of our application 24, and when we will reach some prefetch distance, it will be loaded 8 more items here. So we can also change the initial load size. By default, it's multiplied by 3 our page size. But for example, we can, yeah, it's wrong if. Sorry. Okay. Let's go to the prefetch distance. Prefetch distance. This is the thing that show us when we trying to load new items. Once we reach some exact item in your list. For example, prefetch distance by default it is page size, and when we trying to do some prefetch distance equal 2, it will mean that when we reach 2 items before our list will end, our paging library will try to load one new page size from your paging source. So what do we have here on this GIF? We have here that will load page size 8. Initial load size will be 8 multiplied by 2. So we're loading 16 items at start. Then when we will reach our 14th element, because prefetch distance is 2 items, we will load a new page size from your paging source. Okay, moving on. There is also enable placeholders possibility. It is added a long time ago. What the problem we have with paging library? Once we reach the end of your list, your scroll bar will be at the bottom, and you cannot see that something happened here, like the data loading or something like this, or is it error here? And yeah, as we can see on the GIF, the scroll bar is just jumping to the middle when we setting our enable placeholder false. But if we will set them to true, we should create another beholder for our loading items and so on. It will be much more work from our side. But once we will once we will scroll our list to the not loaded items, there will be our placeholder for it, and our list bar will not jumping, and items will be presented on the place where placeholders was. So, and the last two parameters is max size and job threshold. They're done for optimizations. The first of all is how many items we should store in memory before we will release it. For example, if we scroll list a two-way, like a lot of time, and then we will store a lot of items in our memory. So with that parameter, we can just drop down some old items, not store them. But of course, if you return to them, we should like load them another time. And jump threshold, this is parameter is for how many items outside the bounds of your screen we should call invalidate for them. For example, if the like some sensitive data that we should like refresh every time. So the last thing is a pager. It's just the usual things that where you are passing to its constructor config and source factory. For example, our paging source. Then after that, you can call .flow on your pager, and it will return flow of paging that data. After that, you can just launch your flow and collect any data and send it to your parameter adapter. Yeah, if you don't like flow, as I said earlier, you can just connect to your project Eric Java, for example, and that your pager may be observable or flowable whenever you prefer. So I have prepared a simple example. This is the list of films, especially for Android developers. And this is really simple application without any data loaded from the internet, no database, and so on. It's fully written on paging library version 3, and it uses almost every feature that we have new in paging library version 3, except paging mediator. So the link for this application you can see at the bottom of the slide. So to create this project, first thing that we should do is create our model that we will try to show on our UI. Let it be film model with two fields, only title and subtitle. After that, we should create some data provider. Let it be get data with some initial delay to like simulate some lags when we trying to get data from backend or something like that. And then we will try to take data from our memory with repealed list. Here you can see the function cores at most. It's very useful function for those of you who don't know how it works. It's just like you're specifying the highest number that int should return that we should apply it, and like will not exceed that. Here we need it just because our offset plus size can be more than our list, and it will cause the errors. So we should like call this function and not exceed the list size here. After that, we should create beholder. It's very basic beholder. It will lead us to this thing. After that, we should create our data adapter that will extend the paging data adapter. Nothing interesting here, I guess. It's like usual on binary folder, on creative folder, and as I said earlier, we should create our div callback and pass it to constructor of your paging data adapter. After that, we should create paging source. So here will be easy one. We just will not return any errors here. Will return data just because we know that it will be always data here. So it looks something like this. And the last thing will be our activity. For example, we'll create our adapter and then set it to recycler view. From that point, we should create pager flow. So we creating pager with page size 5 and passing by our paging source. And after that, we just collecting the data from our pager flow and submitting them to adapter. So the result is on the screen, and everything will be like listed here, and we can scroll it down, and it will be loaded once we get the previous distance here. So let's make some loading state, just because right now we just opening our application, seeing some lag, no data, scrolling, nothing happens. This GIF is show it. So when we open our application, we see blank screen. After that, we showing some data. Then once we reach the end of the list, we cannot understand what's happened here. We just like trying to scroll. Sometimes data shown, sometimes not. So let's do some loading states and error states. For this purpose, the developers of Paging Library created the load state adapter that will be used as concat adapter to your paging data adapter. Let's see this with example. In our paging data adapter, we have the function with load state footer. To this with load state footer, we should pass our adapter, and it will work. Let's see the example. So we will prepare some view folder for the loading states and error states. So it's really basic view folder, I guess. And don't take too much time to develop. So it will allow us to show the progress bar and the retry button. After that, we will create the best loading adapter that will extend our load state adapter from paging library and actually to default methods that we know. After that, let's try to modify a bit our paging source. Right now, let's try to catch any exceptions that we can get, and after that, we will try to return the load result error. Moving on, the only thing that we should change in our activity, it will be at load state listener. It will help us to show some loading at the starting of our application, and to our recycle view, we will set the new adapter where we will try to pass our loading adapter as concat adapter. And also, we will try to make this adapter work with retry function. So, what the result of this thing? Right, after that, our application will look like that. We will have progress bars when we try to load something, and error button will appear once we get some error here. So this GIF is describes how it works. We loading data, we showing the progress bars, and right now we will see how our application starts. Yeah, we see the progress bar when our application starts and no data loaded at first run. So that's all with loading and error states. Let's see the new feature that comes with Paging Library version 3 called separators. So sometimes we need to insert the separators between your items in the list, and this is a new feature. Let's try to do this. What should be changed in our current implementation? We should create some UI model field class that will consist of our usual field model item and some dummy separator with some strings inside it. So dummy separator needs its own view holder, it will be much more easier than everything before. So after that, we should change our adapter. Now we should pass not field model item model inside the generic of the paging data adapter. We should pass UI model, and of course, it will force us to rewrite the diff callback. So this is the simple realization of diff callback here. Let's move on. And also to your adapter, you should implement the changes of get item view type. For example, if we are getting the field model item, let's return 1, and for the dummy separator, let's return 2. And we will change our own byte view holder and onCreate view holder to create proper view holders for different view types here. So let's get to our pager flow. Also, the new feature of Paging Library version 3 is a possibility to mapping our models and filtering them. So let's see this in an example. We get our pager flow here. Let's map every item that we're getting from the film paging source to UI model, film model item here. So nothing difficult here. But after that, once we get this mapping done, let's insert our separators. We got the special function from paging library that is called insert separators. And this function allows us to compare two items that is come from our adapter. So if the first item is null, it means that in second items, it means that second item is the first item in your list. And otherwise, if your first model will be not null and second will be null, it means that the first model is last item in your list. So let's keep the situation when we are facing the first item in the list and last item in list and just return null here. But let's see if our model 2 item title length will be more than title length of first model item field, then let's just insert the dummy separator with text title length differs. So if we will run our application, we will see this. So as we can see, if the item after next item after item will be with a bigger title than previous one, then between us will be inserted the separator. So basically, the only thing that is left to say is about migration from Paging Library version 2. I made this migration inside my example application. So this is the link to commit this change. So first thing that you should change is your adapter name, easy one. Then you should change your config to paging config, easy one, I guess. So hard one. Before Paging Library version 3, there was a lot of data sources possible. It was like sources when we are getting integer values and string values and so on. So right now there is only one paging source, and it's kind of really convenient here. So it will be not so easy, but it will be really convenient. But the last thing, you should change your submit list that you used before with submit data. And this submit data is suspend function. It means that it's written in Kotlin Coroutines, and it will be hard on some situations. So developers of this library prepared the second function that is not suspend, but you should pass the lifecycle into the first argument of this function to make it work. So, in conclusion, I should say that working with Paging Library version 3 was pretty nice. The new features looks pretty good, but from my perspective, it's kind of hard sometimes to just to showing some loading states or error states. You should create concat adapter, and I guess it's not really easy one thing, but who knows? Maybe in further versions it will be much easier. So that's all. You can visit my GitHub, star my example. I guess you enjoyed it. Thank you. Arthur are muted.
Oops. Thanks. Thank you, Dmitry. When the screen was dark, you were like a dark lord, so you were not visible, and only your chair was lighting. So there are already some comments that they like to cheer.
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. Thank you for giving us better understanding what is this paging like all about. And I see there are not so many questions, so let's start from me. And yeah, everyone, feel free to ask any questions, regardless if you have already worked with this paging library or you are just like considering if you should work with it or not. We're waiting for your questions in YouTube. And for now, so there is a class called Remote Mediator. Have you checked that? And yeah, do you have any comments and ideas when should and when shouldn't we use that?
So yeah, the paging mediator is a quite big feature, but it's connected with loading your data from internet or databases itself. So the developers of paging library created the possibility to load data not by your business logic. It will be business logic of paging library to understand in which case it should load data from database or your local storage, and in which case it should load data from internet.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of moving some part of a business logic or like repositories logic into the
their
paging remote
abstraction.
data, right?
Yeah, probably.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it. Okay, and in your opinion, in which case would you move from the like custom solutions that we likely have in our apps if you haven't used this paging library at all? Or yeah, basically, when should we move from the custom solution to this paging library? Should we do this, for example, now when we do already have an app that works? Or should we start with this paging library, for example, if we are starting a new object? So what's your opinion?
So my opinion, as almost for every library that I have seen before, if you have your own solution and it works, and there's no a lot of bugs on it, I guess you should stay on it just because it is work and everybody know how to work with that in your team, of course. So the same for paging, I guess. If you already have some own solution that is work and everybody prefer to use it, then I guess you should stay on it, just because paging library is kind of a big one thing and like containing a lot of abstractions, so it's also pretty hard one. But if you are starting a new project, I guess you can now just use the paging library and not create your own solution. Don't waste time, just make features and so on.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I would add that actually I like the way how can we add this loader or retry button easily into the existing adapter, because I mean, I remember how does it work usually that you're creating a new view type, you are creating all these view holders and blah, 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 blah. So probably as everywhere, yeah, there are some advantages and disadvantages. And thank you for your opinion. Do you have anything else to add?
I guess no. Is there any questions regarding to paging?
Okay, yeah, looks like our audience did understand everything very well from your explanation. Thank you for that. And we'll move to Alexei.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Okay, adding Alexei here.
Yeah,
and,
hi.
Yep. Alexey Bykov, Revolut. We'll talk about Jetpack Startup API, ActivityResult API, and Alexey works as an Android developer in Revolut. He organizes Android Academy Moscow, and also he works as a AppsConf and Podlodka Droid Crew program committee. And as usual, let's start from a small icebreaker. And Alexey, would you rather have a house made of chocolate or a house made of French fries, and why?
It is actually so cruel. I would say that actually, to be completely honest, I have refused from chocolate since the previous year, and about French fries. Unfortunately, no. But let it be one more option. It's like a house from the vegetables, like tomato, cucumbers, pepper, cabbage, and so on.
So you would have different colors, basically, to use greens, reds. That's not a bad idea. I agree. Cool. And yeah, guys, everyone who is listening for us, don't forget to ask your questions. I think that Alexei will be happy to answer any of that. And Alexei, that's your turn. So you can share your screen.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep, activity result and startup deep dive.
All right. Hi, everyone. Unfortunately, I can't see your faces today, but I hope all you guys are doing pretty well today and having fun to learn the features from Android 11 with us. Today, we're going to be talking about activity results and startup API. Actually, since 2008, we have been living with old kind of approaches. And now I think it is the perfect time to change something. But before we start, let's get acquainted. So I'm Alex, software engineer at Revolut. We do banking application, which is very popular around the world. To my spare time, I like to have other people to learn something about Android, and that's why I have Android Academy as to organization team. And also, I'm a program commit for Pilot Crew and attend the AppsConf. The goal of my today's lecture is actually to give you the basic representation about activity result and the startup. And I would like to start with a short story. So, and to catch it, let's come back to 2016. It actually was a time when I have only started to deal with Android and started to deep dive in work. The first thing I learned was an activity. And after that, I started deep dive into that and calls text view, image view, fragment, and so on. But one day I had a task with a permission and picking an image. And to be completely honest, I wasn't excited about it. To answer why, let's try to see a very simple example. So here we have an activity with only one button, pick photo. We press into it, and then our system gallery will be opened. Then we should select an image and pass it back to our activity. How would we implement it using old-fashioned approach? For sure, we would start with content creation here, with action get content and with MIME type image. After that, we can call start activity for results method with our own created request code. Then we should overwrite an activity result here, check our request code and check our result code. Then it looks like we can get the data as a URI and set it to our EO. But actually, no. Now we should check it for now as well. And the main problem here is that actually activity result is growing. Besides gallery, we also may have requests to camera and process it inside this on activity result. And actually, this code contains a lot of problems, and that is actually very sad. Let's try to catch all of them. First one, we must care about the codes, which can be quite annoying. I mean, the request code and the result code. Second one, we might catch unwanted null pointer exception, and we always should check our content. For example, about the URI, our photo can be corrupted, so and then we can get null pointer exception. The next one, it is type safety. We may have an issue with related with that. Because we need to cast our data from intent to other models. And second one, it's not possible to reuse in other activity because it is quite messy. And as a result, we spend a lot of time debugging our application instead of focusing on the features which our users have been waiting for. And actually, ActivityResultApi comes to solve all of those problems. The first question, what is actually new? We can update related with activity and fragment libraries starting from Alpha 07. And all our old-fashioned methods as onActivityResult, startActivityResult, and onRequestPermissionResult become deprecated as a component activity. Instead of them, we have only one calls register activity, which returns ActivityResult launcher. And inside ActivityResult launcher, we have a launch method. So let's try to do some replacement. Previously, we had the onActivityResult and onRequestPermissionResult, like callbacks. And instead of them, we have only one callback, which is actually a part of register for ActivityResult method. Instead of startActivity for result, we should just launch our ActivityResult launcher. Let's try to see an example of getting photo using this approach. Actually, all we have to do is just register for ActivityResult, our ready for us by Google contract, which calls getContent. Inside the callback, we have URI. And when user press the button, we just should launch this contract. And actually, that's it. But here you probably might have a question. Contract, what is it? So actually, the contract it is just abstract class. And if you look inside, we may notice that it is a strictly defined input and output, which means that as developers, we for sure know which data should pass and which result should we get. Here also 3 additional methods. First one, create intent, being executed by system when our contract is launched. Parse result executes system to process the result, and get synchronous result. It may be quite not understandable about it, but it actually can be useful if we can get our results synchronously. For example, if we using permission stuff, right, we can check it and request. So actually get synchronous result for this stuff. And we have a lot of contracts implemented for us by Google. It is like a start activity for result, request multiply permission, request permission, take a picture, and so on. Let's try to take a look inside the get content. Actually, it is very, very simple class. And as an output, we have a string here, which can be our MIME type, like image or video, and so on. And as an output, we have a URI here. Method create intent, it is actually pretty the same as we did before inside our activity. We have our action get content, and method parse result, it is actually pretty the same as we did before inside on activity result. But here we probably can have the next question. So when the contracts method being executed? To answer, let's try to look under the hood. When our contract being launched, the first thing we'll be checking it is if we have a synchronous result. And if we have it, method parse result will be executed. If we don't, our method create intent will be executed. And then internally start activity for result, which is actually deprecated for us, will be executed, but still useful for component activity inside. And on activity result will be executed as well inside component activity. And then our parse result will be executed. Actually, this behavior I had described it had managed by activity result registry. If we want to override it, for example, we can do that by creation our own abstraction, which can be which should implement activity result registry. And the method register for activity result actually overloaded, and we can pass it as a second parameter. The very good question will be, why should we do that? For which goals? Actually, for testing, because it is because of that, we can very simply test our contracts with the mocking data. Let's try to create our own contract. Let's see the next example. Here we have an activity with one button. Press into it, and then a second activity will be opened. Here, we should insert any username and press an OK button. And after that, we should just close an activity and pass the result inside the previous activity and show the toast. looks quite simple. How would we do that using all approach? Actually, we would start it with start activity for result, with our intent creation and request code, checking our request code and the result code as we did before, get our data by key from intent, check it for null for sure, it is our favorite topic, and then show the toast. Inside the second activity, okay, we can put string extra with a key, set the result with the result code, and just finish. Let's try to catch what the problems we have here. Actually, pretty the same. Still need to care about request code. Quite annoying. Can be unsafe cast here, and can be exception. We should care about the key. We can catch unwanted null pointer exception as well. Let's try to get rid of all of them. We'll get a result using already built component for us, which calls start activity for result. All we have to do is just register our activity for result here with a start activity for result contracts. Then get our data that is actually string with a key, check it for null, and show the toast. And then when user press the button, launch our contract. Inside the second activity, we don't have any changes. It should be as it was before, unfortunately. And what actual problem do you have here? That is quite better, but still not ideal. Still should care about the key. Still we should care about unsafe casts, and still we can get unwanted null pointer exception. And what if I say that we can make it actually better? Because we as developers should care about user experience for other developers, for our colleagues as well, and try to make all the components reusable. So let's try to create our own contract without the keys and null pointer exceptions. First thing we should care about it is our input. So let it be class out activity. Why not? And second one, it is our output. We may have two different results. First one, it is cancelled, and second one, it is processed. I would like to use here sealed classes as one of the options here. So, third one, let's create the contract class and declare our class as input and our result data as output. And yeah, don't forget to implement parcelable from your generic type here, because we are going to store our data to bundle. And then everything very simple. Define our key, can be anything. Create our intent. Yeah, it is very simple, just new intent with the class and the context. And there's our result, actually very similar on activity result. And then let's use it. First one, we should create our result. It will be the separate, let it be partialized user info with a name. Second one, to register our contract with the user info as a generic parameter, and then process our result. So we have two different results, processed and cancelled. And then just execute it. It looks better than it was, but actually not ideal. So then we will catch it later. As next question, does it work with fragments? And the short answer, yes, it does. But for getting result from other fragments, for example, you want to open fragment B and get the result from fragment B to fragment A, it would be better to use new fragment API. Actually, we are out of this topic today. If you're talking about summary, guys, now it is official way to get a result from activity. Actually, there is nothing new for us, because it is just a composition based on the old approaches under the hood. Default constructs are not ideal because we still can have a null pointer exception, still can have unsafe cast, for example, because if we're talking about passing data between activities, and if you want to have a result from activity B to activity A, we still need to use quite old API, and it is quite easy to have a mistake there. And also permissions by Google are not ideal, unfortunately. But anyway, endpoints for developers becomes more easier, and it's actually for sure better than it was before, and that is very cool. And yeah, guys, don't use it in prod for now because it is alpha and API can be changed. So let's move on to our next topic. It is actually application startup library. To be completely honest, when I was preparing this topic, I wasn't understand why this library actually comes. To understand it, let's try to have some sample. So here it is, like a typical application initialization looks like. We have a custom application class with overridden onCreate method here. But actually, there is not the only place where our libraries can be initialized. We also can do it inside the content provider. For example, if we declare our manifest file like this one with and then our test provider, we can do initialization stuff inside onCreate method. And actually, content providers will be executed before application onCreate. And a lot of libraries, third-party libraries, does stuff like a work manager and Firebase, for example. Why? Because it is quite simple for us developers, and they shouldn't care about library initialization. But actually, we can catch other problem that almost each library has their own content provider for initialization. It actually may affect our startup time. For example, if you're talking about the initialization of content provider, one content provider creation can be about 3 milliseconds and 50 about 30 milliseconds. And then it is only content provider creation. This is not the cost the library does. And after that, our application becomes like like a big snowball. When we get here, our application stop unfortunately increasing. Application starts up. And library it actually comes to solve this problem and also to upload our application onCreate. So the common idea is quite simple. It's to have only one content provider for initialization. Instead of other content providers, we can have just initializers here for other libraries. We can connect this library like this one, and probably you have a question on this topic. What is actually initializer? It's just abstract class. So we have a type of initializer here. It can be anything. It can be actually a unit as well. We have a method create here, which can be executed only once with the context, of course. And we have the list of dependencies, which will be executed before create if we have some other libraries which depends on our library. And let's create our own initializer to catch it. So let's be Timber initializer, for example. We need to implement initializer with a unit because we don't want to return anything. Then I will write for function create. Then just plant our debug tree. But for sure, we should do it only on the debug version because we don't want to have any logs inside our production here. And after that, we should write our dependencies as nothing because Timber depends on nothing library. After that, we should declare it in our manifest file. Let's start with our provider here. Here it is actually the initialization provider from application startup library. We just need to put a package name for the class. After that, we should have authorities. It is like a unique name for content provider. We don't want to share this data using this content provider, so it will be cool to mark it, export it as false. And we should mark it as merge. It means that the initializers, which will be located after, will be initialized inside this content provider. And after that, let's define our Timber initializer. Pretty the same. It is actually metadata with our path to our class, our package. And value should be constant for each initializer, and it should be Android X startup. And guys, that's actually it, and it will work. But I'm pretty sure that you have that you have a lot of questions for now, and let's try to catch the most popular of them. So, how to use it with dependency injection, for example, with Dagger. Let's try to simulate this case. In some initializer, we should know if our feature enabled or disabled, and our toggle can be injectable. So inside create method, we can inject application content, and then check, for example, if Timber or disabled. So what we need to create our dependency injection initializer. That would be like this one. I know that it's actually, for now we have Hilt, but actually we have a lot of codes on Dagger for now. So we can initialize our application component here inside own initializer and put dependencies as an empty list. Then declare it to our manifest file, and then declare it as a dependency to Timber initializer. And actually, that's it. Also, one more interesting question: how to deal with third-party libraries? In ideal worlds, they should migrate from content provider initialization to initializers from a startup library. But to be completely honest, it's going to be very long process because application startup still in alpha version for now. But if you want, you can do it manually. How? We can disable third-party library initialization from the content provider. First one, we should look inside the source code and find the content provider name, declare it in your application manifest file, and mark fit enabled as a false. After that, you should create your own initializer and then copy paste the data from content provider from library to your initializer. But to be completely honest, I don't recommend doing this. So it is will be more pragmatic to wait until the developers will change the content providers, will replace content providers to application initializers. And the next interesting topic, can we avoid content providers at all for application initialization? And the question is, sure, we can. Then inside application, inside the application startup, it calls lazy initialization. First one, we should disable our content provider because it has more priority than priority in library, and just mark it as false. Then we should initialize our components manually inside application class, which is actually quite simple. And lazy initialization is recommended way from Google, and your goal should be to avoid the content provider initialization in the future. So let's talk a bit about summary. From my perspective, it is not a place for business logic. I know that there are a lot of articles for now when some guys describe it that you can just that you can use application startup for integration business logic. But I think each business logic has to have methods not only for initialize, but for releasing the component as well. That's why, from my perspective, it will be useful only for some third-party libraries, initialization, and or some internal components. It is not ideal under the hood because we have to use some reflection stuff, which is can be quite annoying. And under the hood, we also hash map being used instead of array map or sparse array, which is actually more memory efficient comparing with the hash map. And also, we can't initialize those components asynchronously. For example, in Java or Kotlin. But any better than content provider because our time becomes more and more faster. And lazy initialization, you go after migration. But not for now. For now, it is for now not. Don't try to use it in prod because it is still in alpha version. But for future, who knows? Maybe yes. I think yes. So I guess that's it from my side. Thanks, everyone. I will be glad to answer any questions. Also, you can catch me on my Twitter. Yeah, I will be glad. Archer, still here?
Hi. Yep. Thank you for your presentation. Okay. Yeah, I have already got some like feedback that, oh, that's great that Google does this activity result and tries to move it like in some order. So to conclude, so what compile checks did we get using the Activity Result API? Did it become safer for us?
From one perspective, yes, because we can have a type safety. For example, if you want to use the constructs like get content, right? There we have a type safety, and it's very cool. But if we are talking about getting the result from activity, it is still not ideal because we have an old kind of approach, and so we may catch with null pointer exception here and with unsafe cast and so on. Yeah, it's better, but not ideal, I would ask.
Got it. Yeah, and it looks like there are not so many questions. David says you thanks. I think we can join. And yeah, basically all the questions that I have, you've answered in your questions part about like, okay, what can we do with the other content providers or should we use it right now? So I think that was a good job. Oh, one more question. Sergey asks, so what about Activity Result API and Activity Fragment Lifecycle relations? How do they work together?
They should work fine actually, because under the hood we still have actually from a fragment we can start our activity for result, right? Because under the hood inside the new API, it's actually quite old approach from 2008. Yeah, and it works actually the same way. That's it work before.
Mm-hmm. So basically, even if the activity gets undestroyed, we are not going to get into some troubles getting this result, right?
Yeah.
Cool. And Pavel asks, do you have any numbers how much time you can save using App StartUp?
No, actually, I think not. How many? Let me check. I mean, which benefits Yak can get, and is it out an us or not? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Actually, yeah, we are talking about just milliseconds, so I don't think it is actually affects your application stats. But from other point of view, it will be very simple to migrate your application stats from content providers to application to initialization.
Cool. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Google told that you can save about 2 milliseconds for every content provider that was run as part of this library. So yeah, little by little, we'll be very performant. Great. Thank you, Alexei. That was interesting and useful.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, and let's proceed. So now our message to you is that we want your feedback. There is a team working on these lectures. There is a team preparing new talks, preparing and organizing all this stuff. And it's really important that we see what do you think about it, what can we improve, because yeah, of course, not everything is ideal in this world. We would like to see what did you like and what didn't you like. Right. So please, please, please fill out this form. I'll make a copy of this link into the chat and into YouTube, and we'll post this link in some other places as well. So please don't stay away. Take your time. It's just about a minute or two, not so many questions, and we'll be glad to see you next time. And next time, we'll talk about navigation and camera X. Pavel from Headhunter and Pavel from Fitbit will discuss these two topics. We might have one more talk. We're organizing this at the moment. So stay tuned and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for your attention. Hope to see all of you and maybe even more next time. Have a good evening or whatever is your part of the day. Bye.